want to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of Dr. Evan Getz. He has the distinction of being the first faculty member hired as a part of the Honors College faculty here at HBU. My name is David Capes, and it's been my privilege to be a small part, I guess, of the founding of the college and being able to serve as its first interim dean. The inaugural lecture is a distinguished and time-honored tradition in Western universities. Its origins is a bit unclear, but there's evidence of it extending back until the Middle Ages. For example, Thomas Aquinas gave his inaugural address at the University of Paris in 1256. And in that address, he meditated on the sublime nature of his discipline, the integrity and dignity required of professors and teachers. And students, you need to listen to this: the humility, the wisdom, and the responsiveness required of students. So that's a part of it. George Temple, in his inaugural address at the University of Oxford in 1954, noted this: the precept that practice makes perfect is rarely applicable to inaugural lectures, for few professors lead lives of such vicissitude and change that they are called upon to inaugurate more than twice or thrice. The only guiding principles for the inaugural lectures are this: like a farewell speech, it is delivered once and for all. It's not something you give over and over again. And like a farewell speech, it should have a theme that is not entirely irrelevant to the special interests and concerns of the lecturer. And then also, he adds, by the viewers as well. Our purpose here today is to carry on this tradition in our own way and to accomplish three goals, each of which I think is itself good. First, the inaugural lecture provides a way of introducing a new lecturer to an academic community. While faculty and students may see each other a lot at events and serve on committees together, rarely do we have an opportunity to learn what makes somebody else tick or what academic interests the other has. Second, and I would argue that this is perhaps the most important thing, it is a manifestation of hospitality. By coming today, by giving your time, by listening attentively to this or any other inaugural lecture, you are saying, we welcome you to this place of learning and inquiry. We may not always agree with you, but we will practice what my friend, the late A.J. Conyers, called a listening heart. Finally, I believe the inaugural lecture is a way of enhancing the intellectual life of the university. As we all know, we have lots of meetings to go to and lots of gatherings, but they don't always do much to improve the life of the mind. They might deal with crucial matters of life and order and protocol, but at the end of the day, we've not really thought a new thought or pursued a great idea. The inaugural lecture gives us some time to stop and to think, time to stop and wonder, time to stop and remember why we chose this vocation in the first place. So for these and other reasons, our gathering today accomplishes something good for the university and for our newest college, the Honors College. I want to welcome now Mr. Andrew Richardson to introduce Dr. Getz. Mr. Richardson is a freshman in the Honors College, member of the Honors Congress, and his majors are Christianity and Mass Communication. Welcome. Thank you, friend.
Today we'll be hearing a lecture entitled Beauty and God's Visible Providence, Lucy Hutchinson's Aesthetic Challenge to 17th Century Atomism, delivered by Dr. Evan Getz. We're also blessed today to be joined with his wife Bethany, who's here with us today. Dr. Getz is completing his first year as an assistant professor of literature at HBU. His specialty is the study of religion and literature, and over the past year he has instructed courses in the Honors College, as well as the English and Philosophy departments. He received a Bachelor of Arts from the University of California, San Diego, and was later awarded a Master's in Philosophy from Baylor University, where he also pursued and received a PhD in English. While at HBU, Dr. Getz has served on the Honors College Committee, the Research and Development Council Committee, and the Faculty Standards Committee. His scholastic interests include 17th century literature, Reformed scholasticism, Epicurean atomism vis-a-vis Christian providence, and his professional presentation history has included work on 17th century poetics and aesthetics, and Old Testament typology and political theory. Dr. Getz came to HBU last fall with Bethany, his wife of 4 years, and their 2-year-old daughter Claire, who he enjoys telling original bedtime stories to. Stories so creative and engaging, some of his students feel that they should be put into a book. He also enjoys listening to many genres of music and is himself a gifted musician, playing both the piano and violin and singing in the choir at St. Thomas Episcopal Church. He can sometimes be seen in the confines of his office, listening to his extensive vinyl collection, perhaps in an attempt to fortify himself against the coming hours where he must explain to us as students why Beatrice is the guide of Dante and why we must do these things he calls reading treasures. Dr. Getz has a gift not only for finding the best in his students, but for finding treasures in places such as the Goodwill and Salvation Army stores, from the tie he's wearing today to the car that he drove in. He's also a connoisseur in the area of fine teas, and if you ever have the opportunity to enjoy a cup that's been brewed by him, I recommend that you take it. So ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in giving the traditional HBU welcome to Dr. Evan Getz.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks. Please be seated. First of all, I would like to thank the Honors College, President Sloan, Dr. Bonicelli, the deans, the faculty members, and the students who are here today to support me in this inaugural lecture. Most of all, I want to thank my beautiful wife, Bethany, and my daughter, Clara, who's, of course, not here today. Imagine, if you will, you go to church, and you sit down, and there's a conversation going on in front of you. One parishioner leans to the other and says, "Bill, I cheated on my taxes." Imagine his reply going something like this: "Well, as long as you're okay with it, it must be the right thing to do." You might lean forward and say, "Well, you know, there's a few passages of Scripture I'd like to show you that speak to this, maybe the 10 Commandments, let's say. You know, they have a little something to do with lying and stealing." Imagine also that you go to a physics class, right? You sit down, and you hear one of the other students announce to the professor, "Well, atoms do not exist. Rather, the world is comprised of materialized color." Likewise, imagine your professor responding, "Well, do you think so? Then it must be true for you." If you were that student, you'd probably drop the class immediately and tell all of your friends to do likewise. Imagine a third scenario, though, where you're at a party, right? And you overhear a couple talking with another couple about house hunting. You just looked at a bunch of houses. Well, they came across this house that has wall-to-wall shag carpeting, green, you know, in dark brown paneling, in harvest gold appliances, and linoleum that looks almost new, right? And you can imagine the other person responding, "Well, I'm glad you found a house that suits you." Well, I think these three examples really illustrate something. The first two instances are a bit hard to imagine. We may disagree about what truth and goodness are, but we cannot expect to get along in life without an objective standard about what those are. The third example, though, I think illustrates something about taste. Right? You would be less inclined, I think, to say, "Well, you know, you're completely crazy for liking shag carpet." I mean, after all, apparently a whole generation of people did. And you would just allow for the differences in taste. But this is surprising, right? In philosophy, you have three transcendentals. What are they? Truth, goodness, and beauty, right? If you would expect to find objectivity in the realm of truth and goodness, then why not in this other realm, beauty? Why is beauty just a matter of taste or something that's subjective? Well, I hope to show today that it's exceedingly important that we think of beauty in objective terms. And the reasons for this are not obvious. All right, there'll be quite a bit of unpacking today. But the subject of today's lecture, Lucy Hutchinson, a 17th century Puritan poet, made just this claim, that beauty is objective. The somewhat surprising context of her claim was the debate surrounding the 17th century revival of Epicurean atomism of the 1st century BC Roman poet Lucretius, who penned the epic De Rerum Natura, which is often translated as On the Nature of Things. Well, a debate regarding a theory of physics hardly seems the right place to have a discussion about beauty. But in the 17th century, atomism was seen as a serious challenge to the doctrine of providence, which led for some to a crisis of faith. Let me start with defining atomism so that I could explain how it challenged providence and led to this crisis of faith. Well, we're all familiar with atoms in chemistry class, in our periodic tables. For us, as well as for Lucretius, atoms are the constituent elements of the universe. But at the time of Lucretius, about 99 to 55 BC, atoms were much less understood. He held that the world was made up of atoms, which were indivisibly small elements of matter, which of course we now know is false, or void, that is, empty spaces. Importantly, he also believed that atoms were autonomous, that their motion was irregular and not subject to any laws of nature. Hence, they appeared to be governed only by chance. Atomism was said to challenge the doctrine of providence. Providence can be defined in the most general sense as God's relationship to created things. Atomism's claims regarding the most elementary constituents of matter did, in fact, have major repercussions for the way God was viewed in relation to nature. Right now, you might wonder why 17th century intellectuals turn their attention to this ancient poet. And if you read Lucretius, it's a bit of like a long poem that has all the pizzazz of a physics textbook in verse. Well, one reason was he was a great versifier. He had beautiful lines of Latin. It's enjoyable to read Lucretius in Latin. We might say the form is more interesting than the content. However, the more significant reason that people turn to Lucretius is stated by Stephen Fallon. People could observe the effects of physical collision on the bowling green or the firing range. What if the invisible substratum, that is, atoms, operated in the same way? If so, then the laws of physics promise to be rationalizable and calculable. Moreover, the atomist theory was not empirically falsifiable. You couldn't show it was wrong. Why? By definition, the atoms were too small to be seen. This combination of factors made atomism nearly irresistible to scientists. Well, in fact, they did adopt atomism, right? In other words, atomism was very attractive for it offered explanatory power of natural phenomena hitherto unknown. Medieval physics and its four elements, earth, fire, water, and air, had not produced much new knowledge about the actual physical workings of the universe. And atomist theory opened the way for new scientific discoveries, which in fact did happen, many of which I'm very thankful for. Well, there was a problem. Much of Lucretius's poetry flies in the face of Christian teachings about the soul and God's providence. First, Lucretius believed in the mortality of the soul. And second, he maintained that the gods dwelled in undisturbed peace, far removed from creation. In addition, he held that matter is eternal and could not come from nothing. Of course, that refutes creation ex nihilo. Thus, there could be no contact between the gods and the physical world. But this would all be of little concern to those who wanted to revive his atomism, as long as it was not necessitated by his theory of atoms. As it turned out, it was very difficult to separate atomism from Lucretius's other teachings. Many of those that adopted Lucretius went along with sort of his philosophy as well. Lucretius held that his atomist doctrines could lead to true explanations of nature, which he calls causes. The revival of Lucretius's doctrine that atoms are autonomous, that is, they are self-governing, led to a radical change in the metaphysical landscape of the medieval mind, whose influence was still felt in the 17th century. Well, now I need to go through a brief description of what these causes are. Causes, after all, belong to what lie beyond the physical world, beyond what we just observed, thus meta or beyond. In medieval metaphysics, which borrowed heavy from Plato and Aristotle, the four causes, material, efficient, formal, and final, all played a part in explaining reality. What are the four causes? Let me take the example of the house given by Aristotle. So you have a house. A house is built of, well, around here, hopefully brick, because we have hurricanes, brick and mortar and wood. That would be the material cause of the house. Now, what is the efficient cause of the house? Well, the efficient cause you might think of as the builder or contractor you hire to come out and put the materials together so that you have a house. The formal cause is a little harder. We might think of this as what we hire the architect to do, is sort of the plan of the house. And the final cause, right, is the purpose of a house. Well, what is the purpose of a house? Well, at least to shelter people, right? And perhaps to house a certain number of people and meet certain other requirements. Well, importantly, all four of the causes for Aristotle, and then later for Aquinas, and for pretty much all of the medievals, this was an important idea to them. That you couldn't just account for reality with one or two of these causes. They all played an important role. Well, two of the causes, the formal and final, have no part in Lucretius's physics. This is the problem with atomism. Form is simply cast out as a particular shape or an arrangement of atoms. And he gives this sort of military, this combat metaphor. Atoms, you can't really see them, but what's going on is this wild battle where they're in kind of against one another, and there's different sides, and there's generals, and there's some, and eventually some win out, and that gives rise to a certain shape, certain atoms sort of cluster together to give shape, and then they get sort of broken apart by warring with others. But you can't see any of this. In no way is form considered an effect. It's really just a cause. Rather, it is an effect. It's an outcome. And there is simply no access to final cause. Atoms are autonomous. They're invisible. They don't reveal their purposes. In effect, atomism reduces the world of causation to only two, the material and the efficient. Without all four causes, there can be no doctrine of providence. A doctrine of providence demands that the world conforms to God's purposes, that is, a final cause, a purpose for which all creation was made to fulfill. Now, I might stop here a second and say there are two sorts of ways to think about final cause. You can think about the excellence of a house fulfilling the final cause in terms of its ability to shelter someone. But there's also an overarching final cause to all of history. Presumably, if God created the world, there's a purpose or a direction to which everything is headed. Now, there's not just the final cause in providence. Their purposes are also seen in the formal cause, right? Certain patterns of nature reveal this. In other words, if there were a purpose, a final cause to creation, it would be evident somehow in the formal cause of creation. So by admitting formal and final cause, Lucretian atomists of the 17th century made Christian providence invisible and unintelligible. Well, we've defined atomism, discussed why it challenges the doctrine of providence. Next, in order to place Lucy Hutchinson within the controversy surrounding atomism, we must turn our attention to the most important proponents of Epicurean atomism, the Frenchman René Descartes and Englishman Thomas Hobbes. Now, there's quite a bit of argument. Are they actually Epicurean? What form of atomism do they adopt? Well, there are some differences, but there's a definite line of influence. Let's first look at Descartes. Descartes wanted autonomous laws of nature. So he separated the study of nature from the study of God, two realms. Fallon points out, in maintaining the existence and mental activity of incorporeal substance, while at the same time elaborating a mechanical model of causation in corporeal substance. So we have incorporeal and corporeal. Descartes was seen to be opening a conceptual space for God that many had feared had been closed, explicitly or implicitly by the ancient and modern atomists or by Hobbes. In other words, Descartes separates the study of nature from God so that science proceeds undisturbed and God still exists. Descartes himself wrote, "Likewise, finally, we will not seek reasons for natural things from the end which God or nature proposed to himself in their creation," that is, the final cause. "For we ought not to presume so far as to think we are sharers in the counsels of deity." We have no access to God's plans. But that's exactly what Descartes wanted. He didn't want sort of the intrusion of all of this. What he wanted was simply extended matter, things that could be measured, experimented on, tested, hypothesis, proven theory, right? That was really his goal. Well, Hobbes, the picture might be somewhat a bit darker than Descartes. Atoms are not actually autonomous, but are a direct result of God's first act of causing the world. In Leviathan, he writes, "Every act of man's will, and every desire and inclination proceedeth from some cause, and from another cause, which causes in a continual chain, whose first link is in the hand of God, the first of all causes. Proceed from necessity." So in Hobbes' system, what you really have is sort of a giant game of pool. The universe is but a bunch of atoms colliding about, and God is holding the pool cue, right? Sort of knocking the billiard balls. As these brief examples of Descartes and Hobbes shows, atomism tended to view nature as a product of either chance, but more often of necessity. In terms of providence, it doesn't matter which half of the fork we choose. Both divorce God from creative things. Charles Harrison comments, "With first and final cause ruled out, it made no difference whether the alternative was chance or necessity. They were identically dangerous. The whole belief in providence depends upon the relation of God to created things. Thus, it does not matter if nature is autonomous or a product of an unbreakable chain of causes. Nature no longer is meaningfully related to God. In other words, mechanical causes alone, and not God, account for creation." Importantly, not everyone who objected to Lucretian atomism rejected the idea of atoms, and this is important to get. For as an explanation of natural phenomenon, it truly was a useful theory, and as we've seen, we've discovered a lot about the physical workings of the universe through atomist theory. Rather, they objected the inherent changes in the metaphysics that accompanied Lucretius's physics. In other words, they did not object to his science, but the philosophy that attended it, namely the omission of formal and final cause. One of the most important opponents of materialist doctrine of Epicurus was the Puritan poet Lucy Hutchinson, who was born in the first part of the 17th century. Well, she defies many of the usual assumptions about women, especially Puritan women, living in the 17th century. Her family life was affectionate and intellectually stimulating. In her autobiography, Hutchinson describes her parents' joy at having a daughter and their careful care of her as a young child. As she grew older, she was remarkably well educated and recalls, "When I was about 7 years of age, I remember I had at one time 8 tutors in several qualities, languages, music, dancing, writing, and needlework. But my genius was quite averse from all but my book. Her father wanted her to learn Latin, and she remarks, I was so apt that I outstripped my brothers who were at school." Though she was born into a royalist family, Lucy married John Hutchinson, a man with Republican convictions. The couple enjoyed a mutually loving marriage and had 8 children in the course of their married life, despite its upheavals. Colonel Hutchinson was a member of Parliament and a commissioner at the trial of Charles I and proceeded to sign the sentence of death against the king, which is, of course, the defining moment in 17th century history, political history. He fought against the royalists, lived a life of retirement at the Restoration, but eventually was arrested for his part in the Civil War, was imprisoned, where he died without ever going to trial. During the time of their country retirement, Lucy Hutchinson translated De Rerum Natura in the schoolroom with her children. This was the first such translation in its entirety of De Rerum Natura. This is quite an achievement. Her extensive learning made Hutchinson dangerous, not just as a part of a Republican power couple, but as a scholar well able to address the challenges to the doctrine of providence presented by the revival of atomism she witnessed. Her schoolroom translation of DRN was the first to be completed in English, and she, among all other English writers, was uniquely qualified to comment on atomism. She was not subtle in her objections to Lucretius, calling him things like atheistical dog. But her objections to his philosophy were robust and perceptive. She eventually wrote her own epic, Order and Disorder, as a full-fledged response to Lucretius's challenges to providence. Order and Disorder is unfinished, what we have, but she began it as a biblical epic based on the book of Genesis. In it, she paraphrases Scripture, but also dilates passages in order to illuminate implied truths. In particular, Hutchinson, like some of her contemporaries, returned to the scholastics and the four causes in order to critique Lucretius. But she goes a step further in order to sort her by connecting the defense of formal and final cause with beauty. We may be surprised that beauty addresses the problem of physical causes. But remember, she's addressing not just the physical causes, but the metaphysical causes as well. Hutchinson was deeply concerned with the way the physics of Epicurus, as rendered by Lucretius, led to a change in the metaphysical landscape, that formal and final causes were pushed aside in favor of efficient and material causes. People like Hutchinson recognized with concern that if the world had no final cause, no telos as Aristotle would have called it, and reveals nothing of the formal cause, then providence is no longer accessible to human understanding. Such a state of affairs could and did lead to several problems. Atheism, deism, well, God exists but sort of is out of the picture. That's not unlike Lucretius. Or on the opposite extreme, overreading of special providence, which we see exhibited by those who desired to retain a doctrine of providence, but did so without a proper understanding of metaphysics. There's a famous story about this. One thinks of the Pilgrim's response to the sailor thrown overboard on the trip to America, and they concluded, well, this must have been God's judgment on his profanity. Right? Everything is reduced to a direct action of God. In Order and Disorder, Hutchinson made a concentrated effort to defend providence from such perversions, and she did so, rather surprisingly, in her descriptions of beauty. In order to rightly understand Hutchinson, though, we must first grasp what she means by beauty. First, beauty is not prettiness. This is a view which is consonant with the ancient pagan rhetorician Longinus, who enjoyed a revival about the same time as Lucretius. Second, for Hutchinson, beauty cannot be defined, but is nevertheless objective and visible. Consider, for instance, her description of beauty in the human face. Hutchinson writes, "Besides the colors and the features, we admire their just and perfect symmetry, whose ravishing resultance is that air that graces all, and is not anywhere, whereof we cannot say what it is. Yet beauty's chiefest excellence lies in this, which mocks the painters in their best designs, it is not held by their exactest lines." It's from Canto 3. In her description, beauty can act as an objective standard, just as we find in objective moral statements. We can see that the beauty of the human face far exceeds the beauty of a painted image. Yet, beauty strangely graces all and at the same time is not anywhere. The face reveals beauty, but you can't reduce beauty to the line of the face or the color of the face, the shape, we might say the effect, right? It's significantly, it cannot be defined, but yet it's apparent to all. How is it then that beauty can be at once objective, visible to the senses, and yet undefinable or irreducible? The answer lies in her equation of beauty with glory. This is a very important point, specifically God's glory. The opening lines of Canto 3 make the connection between glory and beauty explicit. Now is the glorious universe complete, and everything in beauteous order set. Elsewhere, Hutchinson calls God universal beauty, who then made the worlds that angels and mankind in him in his rich outgoings might adore. In short, God's glory, visible throughout creation, is seen as beauty. Hutchinson's metaphysics rest on the doctrines of creation, incarnation, and the Trinity. According to Hutchinson, we cannot know God as he knows himself, yet these doctrines allow her to write, God contains all things in himself alone, being at once in all, contained in none. How is it that God is in all and contained in none? Creation in its very being bears the image of the Creator. Here's another quote from the first canto, and this is right after her statement about God's being in all and yet contained in none. Yet, as a hidden spring appears in streams, the sun is seen in its reflected beams, whose high embodied glory is too bright, too strong an object for weak mortal sight. So in God's visible productions we, what is invisible in some sort, see, while we, considering each created thing, are led up to an uncreated spring. The formal and final cause, then, are seen as glory, or as the image of God in his creation. The purpose of all creation thus lies in its glory. All serves to glorify God. And of course, this is perfectly consonant, right? First question of the Shorter Catechism. While describing beauty as objective may at first seem so foreign to us, Hutchinson points us back to Scripture. Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the works of his hands. To give a true description of beauty, she is not alone. Read of glory in Dante's Paradiso. Herbert's Jordan 1, is there in truth no beauty? Or Gerard Manley Hopkins' Pied Beauty, which states, he fathers forth, he, God, fathers forth, whose beauty is past change. Praise him. In all these, beauty is something objective, true, and leads to praise. Hutchinson shows what St. Thomas understood so well. We can consider the formal and final cause from a purely finite perspective, such as Aristotle did. But the greater purposes of creation, God's glory, transforms the causes beyond finite bounds. For Hutchinson, matter can never be reduced to autonomous atoms, bouncing around in the void. Atoms may exist, but they do so to glorify God. Similarly, form is not an abstract idea, but the visible providence of God. The operations of nature do not merely imply a finite purpose, but the glory of the incarnate risen Christ. And the incarnate risen Christ is finally the central concern to any doctrine of providence. God's relationship to his created things must always be viewed through the lens of the incarnation. God is not out there existing in some serene, peaceful Mount Olympus. No, he is revealed daily in small incarnations of his glory and is revealed always in the earth-shaking incarnation of his Son. Any metaphysics that attempts to remove him from this relationship with creation renders him remote, other, careless, and finally meaningless. Hutchinson recognized this and asserted the objectivity of beauty as God's glory in response to the scientific claims of atomism. Well, let me conclude with this. So it is that by looking back at 17th century atomism, we may gain new perspective on the relationship between science, philosophy, and theology in the 21st century. The parallels of atomism to evolution are manifold. Some Christians view evolution as a Trojan horse to be kept outside the citadel, while others find no difficulty in accommodating evolution's claims to Christianity. Some are aware of the way in which evolution bears on the question of formal and final cause in the doctrine of progress, while others ignore the philosophical and theological implications, choosing to separate faith and reason. What is seldom explored, and what I urge, is the aesthetics of evolution and how they challenge the relationship between God and his creation. Just as atomism promoted the autonomy of nature, so does evolution. Nature evolves by chance mutations or the necessity of selection. By returning to an understanding of beauty that is objective, Christians may once again see evolution in its rightful place. Thank you.
We'll stretch stay up here just a
Okay.
minute.
All right.
By its very nature, an inaugural lecture is not subject to questioning, but I'm sure he would be glad at some point around a cup of tea in a UAC 100 to share in those questions that might have been raised today.
Mm-hmm.
Joel Stanulonis, one of the things that is often happens at an inaugural lecture is a gift is given, and the students have gathered together to provide a gift. And our resident artist, who does some brilliant work, Joel Stanulonis, has painted for you an image that he wants to share with you now. And so come on over, take a look at it. It's hidden here.
Wow. Look at that.
A small token of our appreciation.
Thank you, Joel. I appreciate it. Beautiful.
Beautifully done. A single.
Thank you. Thank you all.
The image has no title as of yet. Joel, do you want to name it, or do you want to leave it? Should it be in the hands of the artist or the owner? Do so. We'll wait and see.
Yeah.
We'll wait and see.
We'll wait and see.
But I want to thank all of you for being a part of this today. Dr. Sloan, we are grateful for your support and your leadership in this. Dr. Bonicelli as well, our provost. Both of those gentlemen hosted roundtables for us earlier this year. To our Honors College Advisory Committee, all the phone calls you made, all the meetings that you made, all the interviews, scoring all the applications. To the Honors Scholars, all of you who participated in helping today, specifically Grace and Sally and Kelly and Catherine and Joel and Andrew and others. But particularly, we need to thank Miss Kay, Karen Francis. Would you give it up for her? We are very grateful for you, my friend.
Thank you.
Grateful for your scholarship, for your mind, for your heart, the work already being imprinted on the minds of students here.
Thank you.
But we look forward to working with you, and I think we're off to a great start.
I think so.
Have a great day.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming
Thanks.
and being a part of this moment for us.
Okay.